Okay. Oh, there's an echo. Is that because of...
Turn your microphone.
This call is now being recorded.
It was coming from my computer, which I have to present so everybody can see. I think I've got it.
They will pick you up from your microphone.
I don't have microphone yet.
Okay, and are we live broadcasting this or no?
Live streaming, yes.
We are. Okay, terrific. All right. So welcome to the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education special meeting on August 17th, 2021. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Garcia.
Here.
Gebhardt. Marquis.
Here.
Myers. Sargent.
Here.
Sweeney Moran. Here. Zis. Thank you.
Okay, and can we just, is Board Member Myers coming to this meeting or not? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't see her at this time.
Okay, so I'm assuming then she's not participating in this meeting, all right? So could someone let me know if that changes? Thank you.
I shall.
Okay, so we are here for our prioritization and planning meeting, which is really important as we think about the next year. I think Rob's going to start with a presentation, and then everything else will be moderated by Heather. So I'm done for the evening.
Thank you, Board President Marquis, board members. Welcome to our twice-a-year board prioritization meeting. We've been doing this since I started in 2018, and it's really given, I think, as superintendent, it's given me really clear direction around the will of the board and what it is that we need to be and should be working on as we think about implementing the goals of the district, goals within our strategic plan, and improving outcomes for kids. So our agenda for today, and I'm just making sure you could see it because it's there. It should be there. Okay. We're gonna, Heather's gonna walk us through a board check-in. We'll do our agenda setting activity. I'd like to take a moment to review all of the ground that we covered in spring 2021 and then talk to you about what we're proposing to work on during the next semester, fall 2021. And then with that, we'll also have, I've brought with us our planning board that gives us our actual calendar and plan, so we'll know exactly what we're working on, when we're working it on, as provided emergencies and things don't happen or occur. Try to keep that schedule pretty solid. And so, just as a reminder, here's our vision and mission of the Boulder Valley School District, what we value. And as a reminder, our long-term student outcomes align to our strategic plan altogether for all students, making sure that all students benefit from challenging and relevant educational opportunities, reducing disparities in achievement, and making sure that every student graduates empowered with the skills necessary for postgraduate success. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Heather to do a quick check-in, and then I think she's turning it back over to me.
Thanks, Rob. So, board, couple quick things before we jump in. Since we're in a special session, I would argue we could be a little bit more casual and informal with one another, and if it's okay, I would call you by your first names, as I usually do. If you're opposed, now you should holler at me. We're cool? The honor, Your Highness, Miss Sargent. Fantastic. So, as you know, I track the things that you're doing, but only in the newspaper. So I thought for today, you could reflect a little bit individually and as a group on what you've accomplished over the last year or so. When you think back, this time when we were together this time last year, you were planning for a whole bunch of really interesting topics and challenges in the school year that lay ahead. Would you each mind for a moment just sharing with me and with your colleagues and folks out there in TV land, what are you most proud of that this group, this team has accomplished in the last year? It can be one thing, it can be 5 things. I'm agnostic on the point. Eeny, meeny, miny. Do I have a Mo who wants to go first? Tina.
I didn't give this a whole lot of reflection, but I think last year was extremely challenging for staff, for parents, the community, and our teachers, and the board. And I am extremely proud that we were able to pursue some initiatives that are very important for our students amidst the pandemic. And those include things like changing our bullying policies, initiating the equity councils, and also coming up with some more consistent expectations around academic outcomes, which was a very large effort that was initiated in the spring and is carrying in through this fall. And it's pretty great to talk to teachers when I'm out hiking and hear them talk about some of these new expectations, or just, I shouldn't say an expectation, but these new learning goals, and not just about masking or Clorox or whatever it is. So it's great to see the learning and the progress happening in this incredibly challenging time.
We'll go to the right then. Hi, Kathy.
I just have a question. When you say what, do you mean us as just the board or us as the district when we're talking about this?
Yes, that is what I mean. You may choose your own adventure.
Well, one thing I was thinking of as I listened to Tina is I remember that a group of teachers spent last summer putting together videos that other teachers could use of content and best practices for teaching to help other teachers as they were trying to figure out how to go remote and how to do all this remotely. And so I think what I saw was our community pulling together in the same direction. And I felt like the board did that too, led by a great superintendent and a great staff. And it just felt like you're seeing things splinter, but I didn't feel like we splintered that much up until recently. I really felt like we stayed together. And the other event that was kind of a bringing it all home, which I thought was going to be, sorry for the word, kind of cheesy, but I really liked it, was the thing we had at Boulder High, where you reminded us of everything that we had gone through for the past year, including the getting Chromebooks out to families that needed it, you know, our IT prime, and what everybody had to do to make sure that we did as much as we could for our students. And we still have gaps. But, you know, the things you read about, Heather, I'm sure, how many meals we served and those kinds of things, which I'm equally proud of. But it's the behind-the-scenes work that I think that our staff pulled together. We just tried to stay out of their way, I think, mostly as a board, because we just needed to be supportive. I know there's community members who will disagree with this statement, but I was being guided by what public health told me we needed to be doing. And so we hitched our wagon to that, and for better, for worse, that's still where we are hitched. And I'm hoping that sense of togetherness and hopefulness and optimism will carry us through this next year.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kathy and Tina. But, you know, I am really the most proud of, because I think it took a lot of guts on our part, is the removal of the SROs. I think that was very gutsy for us, based on the research, not just on feelings, but based on research and why we did what we did. And I was also happy to see that our superintendent instituted the Equity Council to help us, to guide us through that process. And I was really also very proud to see that it was not just board members, but also and Equity Council members, but also DAC members, as it relates to the SRO issue, that they all came together. I mean, it was like pretty well aligned in terms of what they were recommending and what was implemented here in Boulder Valley School District. I'm also really pleased with some of the work that the district is doing around the culturally responsive aspect of education here in Boulder Valley School District, and how we started and where we're at, but we still have a long way to go on that one. And I believe that we've made a big gain in terms of that. And I see that the school district is really, really taking serious this whole notion of the mantra that we have around equity and excellence, or excellence through equity. That is very, very positive in my mind. And also the fact that we have a superintendent that listens to community and listens well. And I'm talking about not just listening to our middle or upper class community members, but I'm also talking about less resourced community members, communities of color, and I'm seeing that these particular communities of color are feeling more welcome, feeling like this is their school district now. Yeah.
That's excellent. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly just want to underscore what we've heard so far. I'm really excited about the work we've done with SROs and discipline, and I'm even more excited about what this upcoming year looks like in terms of the transitions we're making post SRO. I think what I understand about our upcoming plan feels like a gold standard for things that other folks can be following. Both the equity councils did phenomenal work this year, and it was really exciting, as Richard mentioned, to have Rob not only support that, but just be incredibly enthusiastic about that and come to meetings and, just give speeches to folks there about how important they are to our community and how important the work is. I think today I was at meet and greet with my teachers, and it was great, I think, just to see that after everything that this last year has been with COVID, folks are not defeated. They're not broken. I mean, this is a community that is so enthusiastic about being in our schools and working with our teachers and having the opportunities to come together and to learn. I couldn't be more proud of our administration, our staff, our teachers, and our families in general. I think it's been a monumental year, and folks have done more than we ever could have asked in overcoming it.
Kitty?
Well, everybody said everything, but what I was going to start out with is the SRO program. I'm really proud that we did that. And the other thing I'm proud of is that the things that we do are based in research. We don't just come up with an idea and say, hey, we should do that. When we changed the start times for high schools, that was based in research. Getting rid of SROs, based in research on the SRO's impact on students of color. And all of our COVID stuff was also based on research, and I'm proud of us that we do that because not every district does. So, and I agree with everything everybody else said.
And Laura, can you just confirm that Donna's not joining us? Is she on our list or not?
I do not see her.
Okay. In that case, the work of tonight is to think.
Donna,
Donna, are you on the call?
We good? Okay. So the work of tonight is to think about now what are the priorities for the year that lies ahead. Some of the things that you discussed that were your triumphs and your big successes in the last year will be through lines that continue more work on those that lie ahead. Some new things, I suspect. And then you have some additional sort of optional things that Laura has been helpfully tracking that have come up over the course of the year. We ought to talk about that. And so we'll circle back to those a little bit toward the end to figure out how many, if any, you want to add to your shared work plan, knowing that you have all that other juicy stuff to do. So with that, Rob, can you talk a little bit about the juicy stuff?
I sure can.
Thanks.
What I'd love to do is just do a quick review of where we landed last spring. I think as a reminder, we really tried to limit some of the newer things that we were doing to those that were critically important because of managing the pandemic from January through May. The things that we really worked, I think, very well through, and really big accomplishments, and you spoke to some of these, our reintroduction plan. Let's not forget the 20, 30 hours we spent collectively as a team negotiating our contract, our 3-year contract with BVEA, the work that we did in regards to our transportation study. Again, SRO community conversation continued to go forward. We successfully passed a budget. We worked through many of our phase 1 strategic plan initiatives, started some in phase 2. We got through kind of a plan forward for New Vista in regards to construction. We had an opportunity to meet with other city councils, and we did review some board policy. And phase 2 strategic plan initiatives is yellow just because we didn't complete all of those, but we did start to kind of tap into those. So here's what I'm proposing that, based on our conversations, based on the strategic plan work, based on staff's recommendations, are the things, the major things we take on between August and December of this next year. Obviously, what I'll do is I have a page for each one of these. I'll walk you through and what I see as our role, and then I see as the board's role. And then at the end, we have the list that we've collected through agenda setting of the items that folks thought you wanted to be for consideration, within this fall, and Heather can walk us through that. And then I've also brought down for us, and the public can't see this, but our planning board that actually puts topics, either work session, executive session, information session, study, or action, and maps that over the course of the next several months. And so we can walk through that. We may have to get up and kind of look at that towards the end. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're reserving time each month in the event that there are announcements or things that we need to discuss regarding COVID-19. It's not our intent to bring Boulder County Public Health and Broomfield Health to every meeting. I think that as their information is pertinent, as information is changing, and as they're giving us direction and guidance, or if there's any changes to the public health order, we'd want to be making sure that we're bringing that forward. And then, of course, board members will provide ongoing feedback to staff. At this point, of course, you've given us the authority to follow the advice of our health partners, which we appreciate, which makes our decision making incredibly clear and consistent with the health and science. So our staff over the course of the past semester began a 5-year sustainability plan, which I believe is in board policy. Our staff would want to bring that to you all in September with our new proposed plan that then you would then look at, study, and action, and then approve in regards to our 5-year sustainability plan. We have information to bring to you in regards to the implementation of Senate Bill 191. Our staff would like to bring that in September. This integrates the measures of student learning into the evaluation system for teachers and principals. As a reminder, this is a requirement from Senate Bill 191. Our team has been working on this for 3 years, and we postponed last year because of the pandemic, but we want to move forward this year, and board members would learn about this requirement and our approach, and certainly open any feedback. Our team wants to give you an update on cybersecurity, and we want to do that in executive session. We know that over the course of the past 6 months, there have been some pretty significant cyber attacks here locally across the country. We'd want to make sure that you know and understand what we've done to mitigate risk associated with that, and that we would do this in executive session just for confidentiality reasons. Our budget process, which of course starts in September. We'd provide an overview of the process and continue to have ongoing conversations around the ESSER $3 and kind of some of the work that we've done there. And so that budget process we'd want to present to you twice over the course of the next few months. We have work on phase 1, 2, and 3 strategic initiatives that we'd want to update you on in September and November. We would want to make sure that we're updating you on 5A, establishing a system for strategic managing existing partnerships and building new partnerships. As you'll recall, we've reorganized at the cabinet level to have an assistant superintendent for strategic initiatives and academic services. That's Sam Messier. And so I'd want her to give an update on some of the work that she's already taking on right now in regards to partnerships. In regards to Phase 2 and Phase 3 strategic plan initiatives, we'd want to make sure that we updated you on our work in regards to CTE, which is 5B, embracing community assets to ensure meaningful career discovery and postgraduate preparation for every student. With the other 2A, 2B, 6B, and 4A being things that we would want to update you on in spring of 2022. Which are really related to MTSS, assessment, employee wellness, and family engagement. And so those are things that we want to take on this year, but we really want to focus our efforts over the course of this semester to, number one, give you an update on our instructional infrastructure. If we go back, and instructional infrastructure is really 1A, 1B, and 3A. And 6A combined, so we'd want to give you an update on that, and really dig into 5A, and then 5B as the updates that we want to provide for you this semester, with the understanding that there's work underway in regards to all of these initiatives. They're just in different phases, and we feel like that would be the appropriate time to present those to you. We have an obligation to make sure that we're guiding you through developing your legislative priorities, which are those that you develop, review. So we want to make sure that we do that appropriately. So we're in a good place in December, so we can begin to meet with our legislators and either do the lunch like we did last year down at the Capitol, or try to do a dinner or breakfast here. I feel like going down there last year was very successful. I'd recommend that we do that again this year. Our staff, over the course of this semester, and board members, you've approved the budget for this. We'll be conducting a facility assessment to know, best understand what our ongoing facility needs of the district as our bond projects wind down over the course of this next year, and we start thinking about the continued needs, facility needs of the district. We'd want to provide you an update on that facility assessment sometime this fall. I believe we have it scheduled right now tentatively for October. And then look for your guidance in regards to what do we do with this information, how do we fund this. I think that there's several options that we could consider, and we'd want to bring that to the board for guidance. We have been doing really great work with meeting with other city councils. We've met in the past 18 months with Erie, Lafayette, Superior, Broomfield, and Boulder. And I know that we, in this semester, are going to schedule Louisville, and then begin that cycle, I would say, all over again to continue to stay engaged. To the extent that we could plan some of those meetings this semester, depending upon when we'd want to do that. It would probably have to be a special meeting that's not on the calendar, but you could give us some guidance on that if you'd like for us to start to re-engage. We're happy to do that. I've found that those conversations have been very helpful, meaningful, especially as we've worked through some issues where we've been able to engage directly with city councils, elected officials, mayors, to kind of, we had that established relationship's really been helpful. We want to give you an update on Board Resolution 2033 in October on where we are with our plan. Just another touch point before full implementation in January 2022. One of the ideas that came forward as we started to begin to talk about these ESSER dollars and recovery from pandemic is the community school concept. I think this is a concept that staff is very excited about. I know that I've had conversations with many of you all on the potential of this, and we'd want to have an exploratory conversation in a work session with you all in October on what does this look like, what would it mean, how could that fit into our overall strategy and support our students. And so we'd want to provide you an update on that in October. We also heard towards the end of last year, and this is certainly a priority when we think about reducing disparities in achievement, that we really need to provide the board a programming overview of our culturally and linguistically diverse education programs that serve our students where English is their second language, and bilingual programming within the district. Our team, again, as Nativity Miller assumes the role of Assistant Superintendent of Student Opportunity and Access, she is undertaking this review and kind of understanding of where everything is current state now, is doing that. And we'd want to give you an update in December on her findings and recommended next steps as we move forward there and have a conversation around that. Our strategic plan metrics that you all approved, we will be live, and in October, we'd want to provide you an update on what the metrics look like with the data that we have, and establish a rhythm of being able to not only report that to the board, reporting that to local school advisory councils, but district advisory council as well, as we work on being incredibly transparent as we think about the things that matter to our community most around the data, and show the progress that we hope to continue to make towards our goals aligned with our strategic plan. And then finally, staff wants to have a work session with you all to review Indoor Air Quality Committee. This is a board committee. Want to review the progress we've made and discuss the need for this committee to continue as currently structured. We want to have a conversation around that. I think staff has some concerns on to the extent that the great work has been embedded in our district. Do we need to have a board-appointed committee at this point to move forward? We feel like a work session is the right place for us to talk about that and make that decision. I know that the board didn't take creating this committee lightly when you decided to do that, and so we just want to talk through that and have a conversation. So those are the things that we feel like, those 15 items feel like fit nicely in our overall annual plan. I'm going to have to turn my microphone off unless I carry this around like I'm up, I don't know, maybe I'll try to do this. I don't think it's designed for this, but we've been able to scope this out starting really August 24th all the way to December 14th. We tried to do a couple of things. Make sure that we don't have more than 2 information sessions, if possible, during any one meeting. We've doubled up on a couple of the work sessions because we feel like those topics would not, 2 hours for the entire work session. We feel like that would work really, really well. We do have a couple of spaces, and we also have to remember anytime that we have a COVID update, that's an hour, right? So, I've put one here because I'm figuring it's going to be one of theirs and we could try to shift something around. So I've built in a little space for that to move that around. But as we think about the additional items for consideration that Heather will walk us through, I guess the conversation would be, of the things we presented, are there things that you feel like aren't as important as the other items on the list? Or could we squeeze 1 or 2 of those things in? I think the answer to that is yes, depending upon what the commitment from staff would be. But I feel like we have a pretty balanced agenda for over the course of August, September, October, November, and December. We have these dates here, but we'll wait. We're going to do another planning session when we're at CASB, December 2nd through 4th, as part of kind of our retreat. I believe we're trying to plan that for that Saturday, in which we would then set from January to May.
Excellent.
So, I didn't pause for any questions. I didn't see any hands raised, but
Here
now
they
they're
come.
being raised, so
They have
I'm happy
questions.
to answer any questions you might have.
We start over here, Lisa?
Yeah, with the CLDE piece, you and I had spoken before, and I wonder if these are going to be combined, or if we can combine a conversation about just sort of the different ways we work with our Latinx population. And sometimes it feels a little bit like things are housed in so many different spaces, it's difficult to keep track of all our different initiatives. Having conversations about whether there's a more comprehensive top-down way to do that, both for our folks who want to access those systems and to ask questions and to advocate for themselves and their families, and for us who want to check back and make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for what we're doing. Can we link that in with this, or is it already linked in?
I think that,
You went on Walkabout, it did not like that.
Hello? Oh, I think I figured out. If you pull it out, it doesn't work. So, yeah, I think what we should do is we're planning that session for December. So if there are specific things that you'd want us to look at, report on, think about as we make that presentation, I think that we can certainly entertain that. What we're trying to do is get a lay of the land on where things are right now, right? If you were to, when you think about our bilingual programs, when you think about the services that we provide for our English language learners, I think that schools are making choices independent of a system. right? And so I would want to just share with those things. But if there's other topics or things that you'd want us to integrate into that, certainly we can we can consider that and present that. We want to make sure that we give you all the information that you want. We know that this was a topic that was of concern, certainly for our Latino Parent Advisory Council and other groups that we work with, so we want to make sure that we get that right.
Okay, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying. If we're talking about other things in the future, I guess I'm trying to understand whether I need to add something else or whether it can be done here. The conversation about whether we need any additional spots at a district level that are folks specifically focusing on our Latinx families and our Latinx issues, or whether that's well contained in the work we're already doing, and we just need to be clear with our community and ourselves about how it all works. And these may be two separate things, and if it is, I can bring something up separately later. I'm just trying to figure out if I should or if this is contained in the CLDE conversation.
So if I hear you correctly, are you asking whether or not we have enough resource to be able to communicate with our communities on everything we're doing in relation to CLDE?
I think the conversation that you and I and Richard had at Columbine was about whether all of these things were housed in so many places that it was difficult to keep track, and whether we needed to talk about having a person or persons at the district administration level who is specifically in charge of all of our different activities related to Spanish bilingual education in our Latinx families.
So yes, I do believe that would be wrapped into this, because that would be, as we think about where we are and where we plan to go, right, that would be part of that conversation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Tina, you had a question?
Yes, on the SB 191 compliance with adding the measures of student learning, I am great to learn about it, and will want to add that I want to understand how to communicate with parents, because we do hear parents wondering how teachers and principals are evaluated and kind of how this wraps in. This was a very sensitive topic in our community for a lot of reasons, all of them very thoughtful concerns that people had about this. So I'm hoping that we take some time on that one.
And absolutely, and I will tell you that for the past several years, we've had a staff member leading this, working collaboratively with BVEA as we've established these measures of student learning and the percentage of the evaluation they actually make up, and I think that our staff and BVA are very comfortable with where we are, but we can take as much time, I think, as we need on that. I'm trying to see if I can see when that's timed, and think that's in September. So, yep, we can certainly do that.
Okay. Kathy, do you have a question?
Some of this, Rob, you may already just be incorporating as part of routine business, but we should be getting our CMAS scores at the end of the month. How are we going to incorporate the impact of that on what we're doing going forward? How we're going to make sure our students are where we're hoping that they're going to be by the end of the year? Does that just fit into this as part of what I call activities of daily living, ADLs, or do we need a separate thing for that?
I think I can share those in superintendent's comments. I will say that very low participation rates, and so then the validity and reliability of that information to make really decisions in regards to strategy or progress, I think, can be limited. But we will certainly present to the public and to the board on CMAS results, and I could either do that in superintendent's comments, or we could certainly add a quick information item.
Our community seems to like test scores, some of them, so I think explaining that as opposed to just the superintendent report might be important, because I think we've been bombarded with students have learning loss for so long that if we don't talk about how we're seeing it and how we're going to address it, I just think we need to put an exclamation point or something by that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's much more than your report, but I think it's a little bit more than your report.
We can put that as an information item.
Report plus.
Yeah, report plus. Then just a couple other questions. So when you were talking about our metrics, is that going to include our opportunity to learn goals that we've incorporated? Sorry, I'm catching you as you're running back and forth.
All 12 of the metrics, yes.
And the ones that the committee came up with that are the
Yep.
new ones in addition to test scores?
Absolutely.
And then a long time ago, I remember Bill Sutter was taking on a project that was our ROI, return on investment, and I don't remember hearing about where we are on that. I was really excited about it at a 50,000-foot level, and I don't think I ever got much below that, and I don't know where we are on that work. So I think at some point, maybe an update on that?
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
embedded in what we're doing. I just don't know if we've abandoned that in lieu of something else or where we are on that.
We haven't abandoned that. I would say that last year was particularly difficult to make decisions around data that was, just spotty, right? So when you're talking about, the methodology around academic return on investment, we know how much we spent, but some of the return data, depending upon, what was the primary goal and outcome, was just sporadic with the ways that we were trying to provide school. So we'll be in a better position this year. I think that, let me think about where or how we could update the board on that, on where we're at, and let me check with Bill. And see if there's a place we could squeeze that in. If the board is interested in that, I want to honor and respect our process and not just start adding things. And so if that's something that we want to think about, Heather, if we could write that down. I think the CMAS results, just a quick blurb on where we are as an information item is kind of normal business. I think the AROI update, I don't want to take that away from other things. So.
And then just two more quick questions. I know you mentioned MTSS kind of quickly, so where is that in because I know we're starting to work on that, given some of the reports we've had on how we need to improve that area. So what does that look like in where you already have it slotted?
That is 2A. We have just hired a new director to lead MTSS. And so we want to give that individual time to assess where we're at, start to really kind of build and develop strategy before we begin to present on that. But certainly that work is ongoing. And I think that as you think about what makes a successful MTSS program, multi-tiered systems of supports, for just to kind of break down the acronym, we're in a great position to be successful with that because now we have a consistent and constant instructional infrastructure that then these tiers of supports can then support at scale at a district level. So I think I think that we would want to report out on that in next spring to kind of let you know where the work is, but the work is continuing.
And then just two more quick questions. I know that we're using our ESSER dollars to do differentiated funding. When will we start to see the impact of that and how that's going? Is that a spring thing? Because I know we're just implementing it.
Right now, what we're doing is schools know the dollars that they're allotted. We're having meetings with each individual school to make sure to come together with their plan for how they're going to leverage their differentiated funding and tie that to their school's improvement plan to get better outcomes. And so we're having those meetings as schools are ready to have that. I would say that once I have all of that information, certainly I could share those plans with the board. And then at the end of this year, we would begin to start to see the outcomes they identified that they wanted these dollars to try to impact, to see where those impacts potentially were made or weren't made. And so we wouldn't be able to do some of the return on investment work until the end of the year. But once I have the plans, I'm happy to share those with the board.
And once they have that, then that allows them to start sharing best practices that have actually helped with improving outcomes. But that's an end of the school year kind of thing, if I'm hearing you. I mean, it's ongoing, but we won't really know the impact for a while.
Well, so here's the work is happening. We're releasing dollars once schools develop their plans, and we're checking the research and looking at the data to make sure that they're spending the dollars in the right ways. So that work is happening. For updates for the board on how that work is going, again, I can share with you each plan that we've approved, and we can certainly do that. But then at the end of the year, when we start to begin to think about the impact that the dollars had in each individual plan, we're just going to need some time for the results to come in and being able to process that. But you can't really measure that till at the very earliest at the end of the year to begin to start seeing some of those impacts.
I think this is kind of a theme that I'm picking up from Tina, that I think it's going to be really important, Rob, that we let our community know how we're spending those ESSER dollars, because it's money that without that money, we wouldn't be able to do this. And so I think I'm proud of the way we're doing it thoughtfully and with, our strategic plan in place, but I think we can't talk about it enough that here's what these extra dollars are doing, because they're going to run out, and we're going to have to figure out how we keep that work going. So I just think communicating that to the public about the thoughtful use of this, I think, is really important.
And I will say that it's a requirement that schools work with their school advisory councils as they're developing these plans. So locally, I think our hope would be that the school advisory councils, as the conduit to the local community, would understand how those dollars are being spent locally. But what I'm hearing you say is, at a higher level, at a 30,000-foot view on how these dollars are being spent and what kind of outcomes we're getting at the system level.
Well, and I think you've been really thoughtful in how you're implementing it. So I think it's really important to say, here's what we're doing now, and here's what our expected outcome is. But more importantly, we have these new dollars, and that's allowing us to do these things. So I think the implementation part is important too.
I'm wondering if we could work that into one of our budget updates. So Laura, if you can make a note, let's try to work that into our December budget update. You're writing, so I'm guessing you're getting that?
But that would be different than the ROI conversation and update, separate.
That would be different. That would just be, here's how these dollars are being spent as we're talking about SRs, being transparent with our community, how they understand that we're leveraging these dollars to really meet the needs of our kids. And so I think that we could work that into the December update, and we'll bring that to our to cabinet to make sure that that's embedded in that presentation.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Kitty. Oh, you just. Please, go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, I can't remember exactly when, but I know we were in the old boardroom, and I brought up getting white supremacy out of our curriculum. And I know that's not something we're just going to say, okay, we're going to put it on next week's agenda. But it is something I would like to keep bringing up, and I know that we've had a start in terms of literature approved, bringing in literature, by people of color and about people of color. But I don't want to drop this because I think it's something important that we need to get done. And the other piece that I'd like to bring up, and it was something I learned at the NASB conference, was there was, and Kathy, maybe you remember this, I can't remember if it was a state that required this or if it was a school district, but a graduation requirement of some kind of ethnic studies or something along that line, which I think would also be great. I mean, we're looking at our last census that just came out, and we have more and more people who are not white, and we cannot continue to just be teaching from a white perspective.
So those would be new additions, is that right, Rob?
That's,
okay.
yeah.
I'm tracking the list, and we'll circle back to all of them and see which ones we want to add and scope them out a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. It seems like we are, but before you add any more, I just want to say, anyone has any questions? Do you have a question on the other stuff?
and some
You do your
comments.
question first, and then we'll come back. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, the question that I have is, and I've been asking for this for, I don't know, I guess 5 years now. The whole notion of concurrent enrollment, is that going to be part of that whole, the linguistically, culturally different conversations, or dual enrollment, and something that will be done very, very intentional in terms of this is what we're going to do as it relates to some of the opportunities that will be provided to, it could be for all students, but particularly for students of color or Latino students.
So I believe that really fits in with 5B to some extent, and then it also fits in with our strategic plan metric around acceleration opportunities for students. And so, Laura, if you can make a note around just, as we report out on those things, how does concurrent enrollment fit into that? Right, we have, and I believe we've reported out to the board on the work we're doing with equal opportunity schools, right, as an opportunity to allow and make sure that we're diversifying the populations within our advanced placement and IB courses. And Richard, to your extent, to the in an additional effort, how are we creating more concurrent courses and opportunities for those same students, while allowing those students choice, right? So that, that they could either choose AP or IB or a concurrent enrollment type of a course.
Yes, but also being intentional in terms of the concurrent enrollment. I know that there are districts that are saying, okay, we're going to do a concurrent enrollment on a pathway to teaching, for example. And that's what they do, and it's very, very intentional. And when they leave high school, they've already got 2 years of community college under their belt, and then they can go into a school of education. That's what I mean.
Yeah, just make a note, Laura, that'll fit within our 5B conversation. Yeah, that'll fit in very well.
Thank you. And then the other two comments. One is, or a question also, on the ESSER grants that we're going to be, or I guess they're grants to the school districts, to the schools. You mentioned school advisory councils, that each one of them should have a school advisory council. Is that going to be separate and different from their regular state mandated, school accountability committee, or even the FET that we currently have in place? Is that something different?
So the general direction is that schools need to work with their school accountability committee. Did I say advisory council? Sorry, term from another state. Sorry, term from another state. School accountability committee, that's what I meant. And then also engaging, FET leaders and others as they're developing their plans, and we're asking about that. So I apologize. No, that is an Orlando, Florida term. I apologize.
And to answer your question, Kitty, I was in Minneapolis over the weekend. I went to go see the Broncos win. And go Broncos. That was a great game. I went to the stadium. I flew all the way down there for a preseason game. Can you imagine? My daughter bought me tickets, and she says, I want you to come and spend the weekend with me. And I said, sure, let's go. But while I was there, and I believe I sent you a text or an email, they do have ethnic studies as a graduation requirement in Minneapolis School District.
Maybe that was what I heard about.
Yeah.
There you go.
And when I heard that, I said, wow, that's something that we should consider here too.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe there's folks that want to add some stuff to the TBD list. Rob, if you're going to be annotating this as we go, do you want to add the ROI so we circle back to that one? And
Yes.
I tried to add on mine, and mine won't auto add because you're the boss of the things over there. In the meantime, Lisa, you had some suggestions for additions.
Yeah, just one thing. I would love to do a work session on our all-gender bathroom situation, which I think in some schools is all bathrooms are all gender, and then my understanding is in other schools we might have a single bathroom and it's almost impossible to reach in between passing periods. So I'd like to understand more about what we actually have and what we would need to do to make it more useful.
Okay. So starting with this one, when we have additions and as we're talking about the potential new topics, I'd love for us to spend just a few minutes on each one, seeing if you all know what's being proposed, have a sense of the scope of the conversation, and then Rob, perhaps you could give us a sense of what the lift is for staff. So starting with other members of the board just on this one, because Lisa just proposed it, all gender restrooms, any questions from other board members? You have a general sense of what that conversation would look like? Okay. Rob, level of effort from staff, if the board would like to prioritize a conversation on all gender restrooms? Big, small, medium, large?
I would say that it's large in the sense that if a conversation turns to action, right, and we start to think about the capital improvements that need to occur and happen, to the extent that I understand the scope of the issue on how many all gender restrooms we have and where the differences and discrepancies. I don't have that information in front of me, right? So I would have to certainly do some pre-work, and then if we were to have a conversation, yeah, I think that it's pretty significant. Although, again, I think maybe a first step for me would be to just kind of do an analysis of where that is, if that's a board's priority, but that would take some staff time, and there's definitely, I think, some effort there.
I agree it would be that there's a long runway there. So I guess what I'm suggesting is I would love to have a conversation that we could sort of start looking at what that runway would look like, what kind of cost there would be, et cetera, and not start implementing something tomorrow, but maybe start get a feel for what it would cost and what kind of time it would take if we wanted to have that conversation.
Would that be best as an RFI to start and then investigate?
I would probably do it as an RFI first, because I think a lot of thought was given into this during the last bond, because we started with Meadowlark, and just maybe do an update first and then keep going from there. I don't know how many schools you have feedback from at this point.
Well, I know our equity council spoke about specifically high schools, where obviously I think the issue can be most exacerbated and where it feels also like we have the most trouble.
Yeah, and it might be good to, I mean, and maybe you should do an RFI and have the scope be to high schools, because that's probably a lot better, I mean, a lot less if I had to take a guess.
Yeah, that
And I
sounds
know
good.
that those discussions happened recently, because they did do the restrooms at Boulder High School during the last bond, so there's probably some information out there on that.
That sounds good. So we can start with an RFI on high schools specifically and make that piece one and then move down from there.
Is it enough that Lisa just said that, or do you actually need her to go in the system and submit the RFI? We're good?
Did you get that, Laura?
I'll submit the RFI. I may ask Lisa for some specific language on it, but
Cool.
I
Perfect.
appreciate that. I can never find our RFI form.
Note to self,
I
perhaps
can walk you
also
through it.
remind. Excellent. Okay, so for that one, we'll do an RFI. Want to come back, Kathy, on the ROI, just sense of level of lift, if the board would like to add that to a future meeting agenda, small, medium, large, what does that look like?
Well, I think that, like I'd shared, I think that there's potential to provide that update within the budget update that we already have, and I believe it's December. Do I have that right, Laura? I'm looking. I don't want to get up and walk around with the mic again, because that didn't work well.
I mean, that was
last
fun for
time.
the rest of us, though.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, no, not so much.
okay, which piece are you looking for in December?
The budget update.
We have a budget update on December 14th. And then, let's see,
Okay.
I don't see one in September though.
There is one in September. It might
Is
be.
there one in September?
Yeah.
Oh, here, budget development and process update on 21-22 budget, September 21st.
And that's a work session, so we can kind of get a little bit more guidance on just, if I'm hearing you right, Kathy, like what's the status? What are we doing? When's the next time we can expect information from that process, right?
I get that this last year it was probably on hold, but I just remember being excited about the idea of evaluating our programs that way, because I'm guessing that there are programs that we're doing just because we've always done them, as opposed to because they're actually getting us where we want to. So I just kind of liked that idea of looking at that as we're developing our budget.
And I think the information we'd have at that point is, because of the pandemic, we stopped doing a lot of things, and now it'll be, do we start them up again, versus everything, do we just hit play on everything? We need to really be thinking about that. So I think December's the right time to add that in. Not a big lift, couple slides, and then if there's any further questions, we can do follow-up with individual board members.
Kathy, are you satisfied with that?
Would it make sense for me to do an RFI on just the status of it, or okay, we'll wait till December?
It's on the to-do list officially for the update here,
Well,
and
in
then we take it from
December,
there.
it'll be up to the board as to whether they think it's, well, we'll have to see what Bill thinks too. I mean, maybe things have changed. So we'll get a status on it and then we can decide. Thanks.
Fantastic. Kitty, do you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, I was just curious, given the spotty participation, how reliable an analysis of the ROI would be.
It depends on the item, right? I think it depends on the item. And again, we stopped doing a lot of things during the pandemic, and now the decision will be, do we turn them back on again, right? And so I just think it depends. I think it's, to the extent that we, knock on wood, are going to have hopefully a more predictable, normal year outside of some of the precautions and health layers that we have to add, our data will then begin to be more valid and reliable, and we can start to really have trust in it. So,
Go ahead, Kathy.
if we don't go forward with that, I'm fine with that, but I'd want to know how it is we're going to be evaluating our programs in lieu of that. So maybe if there's a better way to do it, I'm fine with that too.
I think we'll be ready in December to have an update, right? To the extent that we'll have a list of what we've evaluated and what we're keeping and not. I think it's dependent upon the data and looking at that. I think that for some things that we've been able to make some decisions, and we'll be able to articulate to you clearly on the decisions we've made and haven't made. As a reminder, the last big decision we made is we ended the Ready Recovery program. I think that we should present to you all very clear data on why we did that, and to the extent that we have some of those items, we could present those as well, and then where we're at in regards to a timeline to another more in-depth program evaluation.
And then, just to Kitty's point, you would include the reliability information that you have at that time, is that right?
Yeah, no, I think that we would just know what information we have and what we don't have.
Okay, cool. All right, anything else on that one? Yep, Richard?
Just a quick question, Rob, on when we decided to end Reading Recovery, we implemented with something, I can't remember what it was, or it was just moving people around, I can't recall, but I know that the staff stayed, but the program didn't stay. Can we get an update on that in terms of whatever it was replaced with? Where are we at with that replacement? Do you follow me?
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think about. So do you want to know where? I think that we reported to the board on kind of what happened there. I can resend that to you all.
Yeah, we did in our literacy update in the spring, and we've been doing a literacy update every spring, and I think that would be a good time to put it in, and then just remember to put an extra focus on reading recovery.
Laura, I'm looking at you to take that.
Can you feel the
note.
weight of his eyes on you? She was already writing it down because she's Laura.
I've already broken a microphone. If I start taking notes, I'm editing the
Seriously.
spreadsheet.
Seriously.
I'm just.
Slow your roll, man.
I might hurt myself over here. I don't know. We'll see.
All right. So starting then, as long as we're at the bottom, let's go ahead and scope out this next one that we added today. Kitty, when you think about eliminating white supremacy from the curriculum, maybe making ethnic studies a graduation requirement, anything else you want to say about what the scope of that might be if the board wanted to add it in your mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the scope of that would be. I think that's one of the things we would have to figure out, because it's something that would certainly be a long-term project, because it could include, changing texts and that sort of thing, and that, that's not something you do right away. So,
Okay.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that one?
I think before you can tackle that, we would have to define where it actually occurs in the curriculum, right? When you say white supremacy, getting a clear definition on kind of what that entails, where it occurs currently in the new prioritized standards or in the materials that we have.
So I gave you the business card of a woman, and I did not keep her name, but she is at DU, because this was in the first equity meeting we had before the Equity Council, and Tangi brought it up. And, I said, well, how would you do that? And she said, I know how to do it. So I will find out her name. And because we could get some advice from her, at least, where do you look? Because I don't know.
Okay. Lisa?
So Equity Council spent a semester on this, and I think Youth Equity Council touched on it as well, as did Diversify Your Narrative. And my understanding is we left Amy and her folks and a mandate along with our CLDE team to be reworking the entire curriculum with an eye towards things like this, looking into our text, seeing what we've got going on, and coming back to us, I think, at the end of either the calendar year or the school year. So I feel like this is already contained in that work, and we can always see whether it is or not, but I can't imagine that the way Amy and CLDE see that work, this wouldn't be a portion of that.
And then what we can do, Kitty, is if you get that contact, I can have Amy reach out to that contact to make sure that her methodology is something that they're considering as they're doing that.
Thanks.
So does that mean we don't need to consider that as an addition at this time, because you'll just integrate it into what's already underway and do this outreach to the gal at DU? Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. All right. I'm loving starting at the bottom and going up. So teacher pipeline is something that came up at a previous meeting. Someone suggested it during agenda setting or otherwise. First question is always my favorite. Does anyone remember what this one was?
Kathy, is that from you?
Rob, could you make that bigger on the screen?
Yep, he's annotating it real quick.
I mean, when you're done editing.
Kathy, this one was yours?
It
You
could
think?
be.
It sounds like something I'd say.
I need to know more information about what we're doing for, like, I liked, Richard, that you brought the example up. I know that, like, at Boulder High, I think we have programs that are trying to take students and give them credit so that they want to become teachers. And my fear is, in BVSD, we don't hire them, and we don't have a process for that, and we don't train them, and we don't, there's a lot of issues in our teacher hiring that I think we just need to unpack. And I don't think it's necessarily at the board level yet, but I do think we should be paying attention to it. So that's kind of where I am on that, is I want to make sure that when we make that commitment to those kids in high school, that we will stand ready to actually offer them something, assuming they meet the qualifications, graduate, do all the things that we want them to do, when they're ready to become teachers, because otherwise it feels like kind of a hollow promise to me, and that bothers me. So I just like to see us, we keep hearing about teacher shortages. I think we're blessed in Boulder that we don't really feel like we have to deal with that like other districts do, but I would love to see us bringing in more teachers with varied backgrounds than we currently have as we replace our teaching staff, and I'd like to see us be more intentional about that, and that can be reflected in our timing and our outreach and those things. So Rob, I just think we don't know enough about this, but I still think it's a pretty big issue. When I look at our teaching force is not particularly young, and so we're going to need to be thinking about how and what are we replacing our excellent teachers with as they start to retire, to
Tina,
keep up our excellence.
Sorry. Tina, you had a thought on that one too?
Yeah, I was just going to make a general comment to the board when we do these prioritization meetings, that when we think about the title of this sheet, which is Topics for Considerations, this isn't a call for solutions to some problems you may have seen. This is a time to ask a question about a situation you might have observed, to get information that the board will then discuss, and also possibly weigh with our incredible stable of talented staff the other options that might exist. And we all hear about solutions being implemented across districts in the nation. So I just really encourage all of us to think in terms of asking questions, asking for updates, asking for the landscape, asking for what our challenges are, but maybe not starting with a possible solution before we've been able to consider the gamut of solutions.
And I hope that's what I was doing, which is I don't have enough information to
Of
be able
course
to
it was.
suggest.
But I did have some ideas along the way. Rob, you've added this, are you just annotating that this is an update, or is that something you can just toss in the old agenda without us having to prioritize it?
Well, I think that, I think a board update on our Pathways to Teachers program and some of those thoughts and ideas is a written update, no, not necessarily a presentation. I think a presentation would be more apt in the spring as we begin the hiring process and season. Like if we're going to do something on what are we doing in regards to teacher pipeline, ensuring that we're diversifying our workforce, all of those things, I think that probably happens in January or February, talking about our personnel hiring timeline. Is that kind of what?
But my fear is that if we wait till then, we're just going to be doing what we're doing now without any critical eye as to whether what we're doing now is what we should be doing. So, I mean, but I don't think that's really board material as much as, I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds on it. So,
Kathy, would it be helpful before January to get an overview of some of our current strategies for hiring and the timing so that you understand what's coming down the pike, and leave it there and then get the recap in April?
sure, and if there's red flags, then we would know that there's red flags before they're in our rearview mirror.
So, Rob, what does it look like to provide just that sort of recap as Tina described? Is that a small, medium, large? Is that an RFI?
I think that's small. I mean,
Okay.
because this is work we're already planning. We're just informing the board, and then to the extent that then we have to review the outcomes of what that strategy is. I will say that over the course of the past 2 years, again, we've been thrown all kinds of issues and challenges with the pandemic, and some of the things that we had planned to do, we weren't able to do in regards to hiring fairs and recruiting. But I also think that hiring timelines and then, these programs, to Kathy's point, if we're saying, hey, if you do this, you can come back and be a teacher, and then they do it and they come back and they're not even close to being a teacher, then that's a problem.
That would be uncool. Yeah. So we want to keep this as a thing that we'll check in with the board and see if they want to prioritize it, because it would be an added lift.
I think you keep it on the list. We keep it on the list, and then that's something to consider as we're making our spring kind of board prioritization.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you, sir. Anything else on that one?
Well,
Yeah.
if I'm hearing everything correctly here, because I think the topic is teacher shortage. Not just in Boulder Valley, even though we seem to think that we don't have a problem in Boulder Valley, but let me tell you, we do have a problem when you start talking about teachers of color, bilingual teachers, big shortage. And then the question is, why is there a big shortage all over, not just in Colorado, but all over the nation? And then the solutions that people keep throwing out are grow your own, grow your own, grow your own. What does that grow your own look like? What does it mean? And it seems like that's what I'm hearing you say, Kathy, in terms of, well, let's see what we can do. So I don't think that we're putting solutions in front of problems per se, because the problem is there. Now, how do you fix that problem? And the problem is teacher shortages in the United States of America, period. And then now that you have the pandemic, teachers are just not coming back.
Yeah.
Those are issues. So what are we going to do as a district to be able to combat those issues and think of really innovative ways to get teachers interested, or get people, students, especially high school students, interested into teaching as a profession that they see as one of the best professions in the world, because I think we're losing that. And who's preaching that at the high school level? Who's getting students excited about going to teaching?
Okay. Would that be included?
Can I add one more thing
Yep.
to that, which is teacher retention? I think, Rob, in one of your updates, it would be really good if you could talk about what we're doing to support our teachers this year, because I think they've come back from an incredibly stressful year. And if we could just say what we're doing, just something to recognize that we understand that they've been through a lot as well as our students. And I think we're doing a lot. I just think if we talked about it and what we're doing to kind of retain and keep our teachers healthy as we go into this year, it might be really helpful for you just to touch on that. I don't think it needs to be an agenda item, though. Does that make sense?
It does. Couple things. Mike Grados did provide board members an update, I think, last August, September, on some of the plans that we had to diversify the workforce of that Pathways to Teaching, and then also some work we're doing with our paraprofessionals. We can reshare that with you all. In regards to what we're doing for employees, I do feel like that also fits into one of our strategic initiatives around employee wellness, right? I would say that, and to the extent that this is valid, a couple weeks ago there was I forget which newspaper, somebody started looking at the teacher retention rates across the Front Range, and we only lost 8.9% of our teachers, which was the lowest around the Front Range. So I do think that we are doing a lot of things. Hear what you're saying. What's the solution? I think that some of the solutions that we had originally designed were not designed to be pandemic-proof. And so, we certainly can revisit those. At a minimum, I can give you an update on the Pathways to Teacher program, how that's going, where that is, to your point, who's doing it. I can explain that and share that with you all. And then long-term, what are our strategies to make sure that we're meeting our goals around making sure that, that we're hiring teachers and leaders of color. I think that we'll be presenting an update to the board on the 24th on how we did this past year, which is, I believe the data is favorable. And so we can give you that update then as well. And then I think about in the spring, what I'm hearing is, how are we making sure that we're doing everything that we can to be first to market and to bring in diverse candidates, so that as we're hiring, we can meet those goals that we've set for schools for the district in regards to hiring more teachers and leaders of color.
And my only pushback on that, Rob, is if we wait till spring, it will be too late because First to Market's already happening in December and January. So I just want to make sure that we aren't, like I said, talking about it when it's too late. So that's all.
Well, the report out would be spring. I mean, we would be
Okay.
doing that work this, to be able to
Okay.
report out to where we are. We'd be doing that this semester. And I'd say it's a medium lift, but I think that that's something that we can certainly take on. But as we have like 15 other items on this list, I'll just let the board know that we're running out of bandwidth. So,
Yep. And this is why we prioritize the things. And what I will let the board know is if we talk about each one of these things for 15 minutes, as we have done so far, y'all going to be here all night. So just in the interest of efficiency, want to make sure that you have the right things on your priority, so we do need to understand them, but we don't need to have the full discussion at this time. Land acknowledgements. Who remembers what that one is?
And also, we're going to be voting on some. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Land acknowledgements. Anyone recall whose idea this was? And
Yeah,
what the
we
scope of
talked
it is?
about this at the last board meeting. Richard brought it up first. I felt like there was some general enthusiasm for it. So are we just talking about whether we want to bring something at the next meeting? I think that's where we
Land
are, right?
acknowledgements.
Land acknowledgements, Richard.
Yep. So, Rob, what's the scope of this one?
would this be a board policy that the board would be taking on in regards to land acknowledgements? Like what I just need to understand what that would be.
Yep.
Because if it's policy, we could work it into our policy agenda. But then again, that, we have other things that we want to put on there, but I'm just trying to think, what does that look like?
I'm happy to take this one and research it using fellow, peer board members and mayors to see what other people are doing and how they approached it. Is that okay with everyone?
And then, Tina, you would just circle back and give a report out to the board under matters from the board. Okay, fantastic. All right. Tina will research. Excellent. Now, graduation requirements on ethnic studies. We talked a little bit about that one when we were talking about the white supremacy, but specifically, this would be a new requirement. Is that how you envision it, Kitty?
Yes.
Okay. Rob, level of lift?
Pretty significant. When you start talking about changing graduation requirements, that impacts every single student in the district. Significant lift.
Okay.
Well, maybe it's something we could start out by just offering, developing a course and offering it. And, instead of, doing a whole big graduation requirement.
I think Boulder High already offers something like this.
Well, good. I'd do all the high schools.
I don't know, but so it might just be trying to find out, because I remember talking with James that there was a really interesting course that he offers that sounds similar to this.
Yeah, that would be a great first
Should we
step.
start with an RFI?
Yep. So
Sounds
Rob's
like an
Rob's
RFI.
already got you covered here. RFI on courses in schools. Lisa, is that what you were going to say or something different? We're good? Okay. That works for you, Kitty? Fantastic. All right. NHS, equity, flexible pathways for volunteer service and advanced classes. What was that? Sounds juicy.
This was Stacy's, and I think she connected with you, Rob, over this. Would you think that's still active? This is about National Honor Society.
Here's the issue, and our staff is going to be looking into this. You have, for National Honor Society, currently, we have 6 high schools where there's 6 different criteria to enter National Honor Society, potentially. And so it's something we're investigating. So at some schools, you have to take a certain number of AP classes to be a National Honor Society. In other schools, it's just a GPA. And so I think that the question around, is, why if National Honor Society, is this something that we want to continue to allow schools to set the criteria for? Do we want to standardize that criteria to provide equitable access? And I think that's the $1 million question. So we're investigating it. And then we're going to have conversations with high school principals on kind of their thoughts.
Yeah, I think the other issue is the requirement for community service and the availability for all students to be able to do that.
So Rob, this one is somewhat underway already. We don't need to add it, or do you need the board to
Yeah,
prioritize
I think
it?
I need to do more work on it. I need to get an idea of where current state is, the history around why this has happened, and then start to think about, as we think about, access and opportunity for kids, when we start looking at the students that are in National Honor Society, do they reflect the diversity of our schools? What, do they reflect, the percentage of students that are receiving free and reduced lunch in each school. I think that there's some data that I need to look at. I think that staff is working on this. I've already working with our deputy on starting to dig into that. And then when I have something to bring back, whether it would be a board policy or a district practice or a regulation or something along those lines, I would bring that back. But I don't know. I think that this is staff work that's ongoing, and that we'll bring it back.
Okay.
And also looking at what are the structural limitations. Is this tied into even some structural racism as it relates to the honor society? When was it started? For whom? And all that stuff.
Sounds like a good one. All right, next one up, school closure process.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
mine.
an
Yes.
easy lift.
Tina, go ahead.
I think it's important for every district to have a school closure process prior to them being in a time of crisis due to declining enrollment.
Okay.
But Tina, I thought you were hoping we'd start that conversation in January since you leave in December.
It's just the process.
And I agree, but I think we need to be proactive.
Okay. Rob, level of lift on this one?
Developing the process or implementing the process?
Discussing and developing the process.
Well, I think that we can discuss a process, so we can certainly start that conversation, but pretty significant lift in the sense that we would want to make sure that we're researching, what other districts have done, when you start to think about, I think it's significant board time too. There's going to be lots of board conversation on what these things are, because if you're talking about a process that's board policy, is that what you're referring to, Tina, setting board policy around a process?
It doesn't have to be policy.
Would it be something the board would act on?
No, it could be an exhibit to our capacity policy.
Some kind of a thingy.
I'm
what
gonna
I'm
need to
hearing.
think about, yeah. Listen, this is an issue that we're going to have to tackle as a team, right? Like, I know that. I'm not saying that we don't have to tackle that. I do know that. I'm just trying to think about the timing and when we start to do that. So I get.
When was the last time we closed a school down or shut it down?
By
Sure,
very
there was a
Here's
process
my
for that.
hesitation. My hesitation is when you start talking about that, people start to get scared that you're getting ready to close their school down. That's why you're doing it. And Tina's talking about just something that the district should have, but how do we have this conversation in a way that schools don't feel like we're doing this to close X, Y, or Z school? Right, so I think that that's the challenge. That's why I'm wrestling with this. I think that we can certainly begin to start thinking about this. I think that the conversation probably best comes after maybe our facility assessment and maybe enrollment, kind of as enrollment comes in. I think we put it in the scope of work, but I just don't know when we would present back out on that.
Do you want to wait and see if it becomes one of the highest priority items for the board before we figure out when you would do it? Because maybe it's a lower priority from some of the other things.
Yeah, we have to do it.
He's just
like whether it's
waiting
a-
until I'm off the board.
No,
He's trying to figure it
Tina,
out.
no, because
He's
then you'll
waiting
show
you
up
out.
for public comment and talk about it. Well,
Lisa has a thought.
Can we just get this on the list for our next semester? I mean, it's clear we're pretty booked now and that there's a lot of things we still need to see, but I think if we could prioritize this for something we know we need to talk about starting in second semester, that might be ideal.
Got a thumbs up from Kathy. Others of you cool?
so we're adding this to what we're talking about is you're directing me to add this into the spring semester as a prioritized thing to speak to. That works for me.
Is there a will of the board there? I see. Yep. Okay.
That works for me.
Okay. Great.
You have it down. Thanks, Laura.
So Rob, I'm just tracking on this list. So far, most of these things are somewhat that we've tended to them either because they're underway, you have a plan for them. So do we have anyone that we would need to prioritize right now, or these are all some version of underway? The ones below where we are now. I'm just tracking. So when I'm going to ask the board to prioritize, so far from the bottom up, most of these things have a plan, a path forward already. Is that right?
There isn't anything on here.
Just the ones we've talked about so far.
Yeah,
Okay.
there isn't anything on here where I'm saying no.
Okay.
Like, we can't do that. There's no way. I just, starting the progress, sometimes these things take a little bit of time.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is I might not be able to deliver, like when I show you this list, right? I'm giving you a list of things we're going to talk about and deliver something on. Does that make sense, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
like, we'll have the 5-year sustainability plan, right? We're going to deliver on where we're at with teachers. Like, so this other stuff is just work that's in kind of, I think, in the stream that we try to fit it in, and it just may take longer if we don't have the bandwidth to dedicate the resources to it. But everything that up to this point, I think that we can get started.
Great. Okay, so we're not overloaded yet.
Well, we're getting close, but
All right, Okay, so let's see what they think of the other ones, and then I do want to come back at the end after we hear about these others and let you say, this is too much. What are the actual priorities among these many important topics? All right, but in the meantime, I'd like to hear about Board Policy KH. You guys always had the most creative names for your board policies. Love it. What is Board Policy KH, and why might we be talking about it, Tina?
So those are gifts to school, individual school fundraising, and how the school funds are then allocated to other schools. Because of the strategic plan initiatives that have to do with equitable allocation of funds, I would imagine this could be contained in that. And even to the extent that it's contained, I would probably punt it to the next semester, because this would be a big lift if anyone considered changing it. And also given the way we allocated money this year, which I thought was done equitably and significantly, I don't know if I would personally prioritize this.
Okay. Other board members have thoughts on that one? Agree? A lot of nodding and agreeing. So maybe tee that one up for next semester, let it lie for now. Okay? All right. While Rob's doing his magic there, let's talk about open enrollment. What's the issue? What's the question?
I always encourage us to look at our open enrollment policies and make sure that they give equitable access to children with IEPs to all of our schools, including our charter schools, as well as equitable access to our children who have less security in their length of residency in a district. So we have a couple schools that have preferences for students that have applied more than once to a school, which inherently gives less preference to children who have just come to the district, and that could be an immigrant or someone who has less housing security.
So this would be a change in policy?
It would be a suggested change, and actually it's not the policy, it's the regulation.
It's the thingy. Rob, level of lift for staff and the board to tackle this one?
So like the school closure process, if we start, here's what makes this hard, right? You need a year to kind of wrestle with this, right? Like, so to start it now, you can't impact, it's too late. Like open enrollment starts October, November. I think significant lift. I think that if this is truly a board priority, that this what all board members would have to say, you need to work on this now, because I think it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of engagement, right? I don't think you do something like this in isolation. We're going to have to talk to parents. I mean, folks, whether perfect or imperfect, folks are familiar with what our open enrollment policies are. I think about when I got here the year before in 2017-18, there were some shifts in some open enrollment preferences. Do you all remember that? And people trying to do the right thing, but then it ended up shaking out winners and losers, and then what happened is that you had public outcry that we haven't followed the policy. So I think that this is a 12-month activity,
Okay.
and I do think it takes significant it would take significant staff time, because it's going to take significant engagement time. This would be something we'd want to bring to all of our groups. And we would want to really start with a board conversation around kind of what the board is thinking and what are the priorities of that. And then you'd have to go throughout the engagement. Then you'd have to do some proposed changes. Then it would have to come forward with study and action, 6 to 8 month process. And I think that you would have to do that and then implement it the following year. And be clear about that, because so folks who are trying to think about open enrollment, like the decision would be made beyond what they were thinking, and you would be able to just try to focus folks on that. I don't know, I mean, so significant.
So if there's a will of the board to tackle this one, it would be a big effort, and we would need to prioritize it because it would have significant implications for your year-long work plan. Is that right?
Yep, and I think it would tap into our bandwidth around other policy changes that we would want to be making. I think that would take, and then it would also impact DAC, right, as well, because we'd want to have their input on this, I'm guessing.
So I think we're going to vote on this. I don't feel comfortable just kicking it down the road without any timeline. I'd like to at least think about doing what Lisa suggested, which is bring it up to see where we are in January. Because given your timeline, Rob, that would mean we could at least have the conversation by the end of the school year. I don't want it to be a 2-year out thing that we've even looked at it to see if it's equitable and is achieving what we need it to do.
So talk in January to see if we want to prioritize it for work in the next upcoming year for implementation 2 years from now. That sounds right.
And do we have data on how it's inequitable now? Because that would be, I mean, I'm sure we have it, but it'd be good to see before we discuss it.
Okay. So I'm categorizing things differently than what Rob's doing here, so we actually know which ones are a separate set of things that we would really need to tackle and prioritize if you wanted to add them. So we can circle back to that. In the meantime, bring family resource people to a work session to talk about what they do and the communities they serve. What was this? Anyone recall?
That was
Richard?
mine.
Okay.
We approved a contract for family resource schools, I can't remember when. And at that time, we were talking about, well, what do they do? How do they function? What is their role, et cetera? And I recall many years ago, the Board of Education actually had a work session with family resource school personnel so that they could actually explain to the board how they function, what they do, et cetera. So that was a suggestion that I had as a work session.
Okay. Tina?
Can I just clarify that these are just the ones that are paid for by the Boulder City tax for family resource schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Would this be fitting in with our community school stuff?
No? Okay.
I mean, I think the challenge is, what work session do you want to take off? Because we've got, or do we want to add to a work session we have? I don't know that the workload is all that significant, right? Because it's just inviting folks in. Last time we met with the city of Boulder in our council meeting, I think that we talked about it there as well. I mean, maybe a suggestion would be the next time we meet with the city of Boulder, and we could think about that in the spring, that we would talk about that, because that's a common investment that we both make in those programs.
I think that's a really good idea, and I think the council would really like to hear about it.
Richard, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm not really sold and married to the idea. I'm just making a suggestion, and I believe that probably every board member here knows what a family resource school is and how they function. So.
Okay. So, Laura, are you making just a note that when you guys circle back and meet with Boulder City Council, you might invite these folks in to have a conversation? Thank you, ma'am. All righty. Next one up is customer service, front desk employees, courtesy, training, etc. I think, Richard, this was and also have a Spanish language, right?
Right. This was also mine, and this is based on the work that the Engaged Latino Parents Advancing Student Outcomes is doing. I believe even the Latino Parent Advisory Council is doing, is that they're finding a lot of instances where Spanish-speaking folks are have their kids enrolled in predominantly white schools, and they're not getting the reception that they should be getting. So they're looking to see if there's any possibility for further professional development for the front office staff people so that they can understand that. And also, as people leave, maybe think about truly making an effort to hire bilingual people.
Okay. Level of lift on that one?
I support the idea, right? So I do think that we need to make sure that we're providing folks the training so they can be culturally responsive if they're working within our front offices, to the extent that we're providing training currently, or the trainings that those folks have time to do within their contract. I have to do some investigating on that, right? Like, so to the extent that classified staff have dedicated training days, like our teachers have lots of dedicated training days, but if you're training the front office staff, then who's covering the front office? I mean, I think there's some logistics. I do think that this fits in with our strategic initiative, 6A, and being culturally responsive. I do think that there's some parallels there. So I'd ask the board to let me work on this a little bit. Let me see where we're at. Let me see what the potentials are. And then if it's something that we can do, right, then I would just do it and just report how it went. And if there's barriers to that, I could bring that back to the board and do that either through just written communication, kind of let you know where that's at.
That would work for me, Rob, but I'm also looking at school starting in tomorrow. And you're going to have that situation arise, and I'm thinking quickly after school starts, and I know that for many of our residents in our community, that's the worst thing that can happen to them is being disrespected when they walk into a building, and they're disrespected at the front level, at the front office level. They're not coming back.
So here's what I would share. I agree. We have invested significantly in interpretation and translation, and I think that's a level of support for schools that can help with some of this, right? To the extent that parents showing up, being turned away, or hey, we don't speak, whatever language you speak, come back later, or you just, or doing some rogue translation of somebody who kind of speaks the language. I think that we can avoid some of those issues because we do have directors of, and we have centralized translation, but I don't think that that's enough, right? So, I mean, there's nothing I can do before tomorrow, right? Like, I mean, I think that that's clear, but I do think that this is something we could work towards. I could start to investigate what it would take, right? Because we have the professional learning staff. It would be just developing the training, finding the time for those folks, and whether we'd have to compensate them or give them flex time to be able to do that, and think through that. So let me do some digging. Let me come back to the board on kind of where we are with that. Yeah, the goal would be that we would have a plan by the end of this semester if we haven't implemented it already.
So we're sort of classifying that as you're just going to tackle it, or do you need to understand where it fits with board priorities relative to other things?
No, I think it clearly aligns with what it is
6A?
we're trying to do.
Okay.
And it's a good idea that we want to just investigate and figure out how to operationalize.
Okay, excellent. All right, in that case, next item is checking in with employee groups. Anyone recall, Kathy?
I just think that is an important thing that we could do. And I don't know what the timing would be, Rob, but I feel like we don't hear from the other employee groups other than the teachers for the most part. So I know we've closed the contracts, so I think it's worth at least a conversation later. I know it's getting late, about how often we want to hear about how things are going with our employee groups. Because I just remember a few years ago being pretty surprised when the bus driver showed up at a board meeting and finding out that we didn't have a contract with them and that there were a lot of issues. I think we've solved all that, but if we can stay in front of it by being in contact with them or getting an updated report, I don't know what it looks like, but I don't think it's a heavy lift. I just think it's figuring out what the rotation and timing is for how we find out how things are going. And in interim years when we're not doing contract negotiations, if that makes sense.
That make sense? Okay. So
Let me think about how we would structure that.
I mean, this is a spring thing, and it's not a high priority. I just I want them to feel heard and listened to, is all I'm trying to figure out, and avoid the surprise that we had. I don't think we're facing that at all, but I know that I feel like we put a lot of attention into our teachers and not as much attention into our paraeducators and into our classifieds.
Well, there's another issue, and there are employee groups in our district that are heavy with people of color. I'm thinking about the janitorial staff. And I've already heard from at least one person, and that he is being mistreated, he's a night custodian, blah, 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 blah. And that's one, that's a specific example, but I think that we need to figure out a way to hear from our custodial staff and from people, how they're being treated in our school system. Because it happens. They're not treated well.
I'd make a suggestion. If you have that information, please send that to me so I can have our staff investigate, right? Certainly we don't want any employees being mistreated. I think here's, what is the, so staff engages, right? So we engage with all of our employee groups. I know that Rob Price meets frequently with BVCEA. I know that I meet weekly with BVEA. I know that we're having ongoing more connections with BVPA, and then the Boulder Valley Educational Office Professionals. I think that's the acronym. I think that we have continued engagement with that. So the question would be, do you want us to share with you kind of how those engagements are, or do you want to engage as a board? And to what extent does the engagement with the board differ from the engagement with staff, and who's what's role? I think that's the piece we have to figure out.
I personally I just learned something. So in your superintendent's report, you could just tell us, we've had ongoing meetings with these organizations. And then if we have questions like we do when you've done a report, we can ask you. But I'm not looking to have additional engagement.
You just didn't want them hanging out there?
I guess.
Yeah. That's a separate issue than this gentleman that's been mistreated, and Rob, you'd like to have a
That's
separate
the job.
report.
That's my job as superintendent. Staff needs to come to me. We need to sort those things out.
I will give you that information, but again, it's also pretty sensitive because the fear of retaliation too from some of these individuals.
Okay. All right. So I'm using my own classification here, but that sounds like that one, Rob, is sort of add to your own updates. So my category is add to existing as opposed to freestanding new items. Does that work for you? Okay. All right. Pledge of Allegiance at school board meetings. I recall we talked about this last time.
We talked about it last time without the last 4 words, and then I think agreed to tag them on and discuss it next time. I'd still like to discuss this. I think not all members of our board stand for or say the pledge. It doesn't feel representative of all members of our community. And if we're going to start our meetings saying something in unison and focusing on it, I'd love it to be something that everybody in the room feels strongly about and that we think aligns clearly and consistently with our mission.
Rob, level of lift just for staff and the board to have that conversation if it becomes a priority.
Well, the lift is the conversation, right? The lift is the conversation, whether the board wants to have that conversation. And then I thought I remember some questions around law. Is saying? Am I thinking about a different place?
No, you're right, because before it was Pledge of Allegiance in schools, and that was when Kathy and Tina clarified for me that was not something we could change because of Colorado state law, but that this was something that we could choose to handle as we wished.
Yeah, I defer to the board if they want to take on this conversation or not.
Not to push it down the stream, but it seems like, Lisa, maybe we do that when we have our newly elected board.
I'm up for that. I would just like to not keep kicking it.
Yeah,
Is
no,
it
I think
possible
that's
that we can
fair.
also tag this as something we guarantee to have at least a conversation about in the spring with our new board?
Absolutely, and I would love to know what the options are for things that we could say that are unifying. But it just seems like it makes sense that I would want to know the input of new board members on this.
I think that sounds fine. I just want to make sure we get to the conversation eventually.
Okay. All right, the last item is safety and security during lockdowns.
I think the conversation was the way that we're doing lockdowns is traumatizing our kids.
I think that was something different. I remember you and I talked about this. I feel like I remember somebody bringing this up, and I want to say it was Donna, but if we want to talk about lockdown drills, that was something I had mentioned. I don't necessarily need it to be on this list right now.
Okay, 'cause that's what I thought this
Okay.
was, if I was recalling correctly.
So we're taking it off the list. I see nodding. I need some sort of visual indicator from everyone. Thumbs up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Cool. All right, that one's coming off the list. All right, so Rob, you and I are classifying things differently, so I want to make sure we're on the same page. We basically have 2 RFIs, which is about graduation requirements on ethnic studies and all gender restrooms. Then we have one item that Tina is just going to tackle on her own, which is land acknowledgements. Kitty, you also had your own action item just to send the DU gals information to Rob so he can follow up on that related to the white supremacy stuff. Things that are underway in some way, shape, or form already, Rob, seem to include, so this customer service question at the front desk, that's integrated, as you said, into 8A or 6A, and you're going to do a push on that in the near term. Already underway is the National Honor Society stuff. Already underway is the white supremacy and removing that from the curriculum. Things that we're sort of adding to things that are on the list that were already on the to-do list, the ROI update, you're just going to add that into the budget conversation. Also adding this question of the family resource folks and bringing them into the Boulder City Council meeting. So by and checking with the employee group, since you're already doing that as part of your job, you're just going to add updates to that to your superintendent's update. So we're wrapping that into things that are already underway. So what that means is there seem to me, by my count, to be 5 things that would be new and extra. One is this Pledge of Allegiance conversation, which we want to talk about in the spring, open enrollment, policy KH, school closures, and maybe a broader conversation on the teacher pipeline. Are those all new things? The teacher pipeline one got real gray to me, so I'm not sure if you're just going to, if it's underway and you're adding it, or if it is actually a separate conversation.
Well, the work has to happen now to impact next
Understood.
year.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel really good. Yeah, no, I think that the things that we wouldn't be directly addressing this semester, school closure process, board policy KH, open enrollment, the Pledge of Allegiance,
Okay.
and those would be things that we would commit to really implementing in next semester's prioritization. Am I kind of gathering that correctly?
Except I think open enrollment isn't meant to be a big conversation next semester, but that you're telling us you need an entire year for it and it should start in the fall, so that we would be starting next semester to tell you whether we wanted to give you the go-ahead to make it a fall priority. Not that it would be a huge spring conversation.
The conversation is whether we want to do it, scope it out a little bit, provide some direction.
Yeah, I'm only clarifying
yeah.
in terms of the
Yeah.
lift, that I
Yeah.
wouldn't add this to be like an enormous amount of work in spring. I think it's a spring conversation about work in the fall.
So, Rob, does that mean that for those items, in January, when we come back to the board for this conversation,
In
those items
December.
will be in some of your,
We'll come back in
December, right, but those will be on, these items that we're talking about, open enrollment, KH, school closure, and the pledge, those will be boxes that you'll just wrap in, like you did, and you'll say, we've already identified these?
Except for the open enrollment. Yeah, no.
You'll start the conversation on open enrollment, as Lisa just described.
Yes, no, we'll put those on the annual plan for spring 2022.
Okay?
And
So-
whether it's just a conversation to move forward or what have you, there'll be a time for us to engage on all 4 of those things.
Great.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing that the board's directing.
So that's what I'm now asking the board is that what you would like? Most of these things are going to be addressed. Those items will then become things that Rob would present to you as priorities for the spring semester.
Does that feel good, Rob?
That would,
Well, it feels good that I'm not just saying no to a bunch of things that you all care about. That feels good. I think that, but then some of these other things are we'll have to revisit as well, right? Like, so some of the RFI and stuff, some of those things will be in the list. So I feel good that we've come to some consensus on the list and how we're going to act and react, and I don't feel like there's anything that I'm overcommitting at this point. Some of it's just starting work, and then I feel good about being able to go through item by item. I don't know that we've been able to do this before, Heather. I think it's been more like, okay, we could do 1 or 2 of the things, and then we haven't maybe had the conversation like we did tonight. So I don't know how that felt for everybody.
We did add to the board one thing, which was the CMAS discussion, and
right.
Yeah, and that's not a problem.
Yep. All right, so,
Before you go on, Heather.
Yes,
Let me
sir.
ask a question on the RFIs. On it. You talked about it just very briefly just now, and that was my question is, okay, so you do the RFI, And then what happens to the RFI? I mean, because how many RFIs have we done?
I think
And what
that's a
have we
good
done
point.
with
When we're
them?
talking about spring work, if we want to move forward with a further conversation on ethnic studies requirement or all gender restrooms, would we be able to fit those in the spring, or are those then going to get punted into the fall after?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just want to go back to the RFI piece because I think the RFI process really supports that each conversation starts with a question to say, okay, what does the landscape look like? Where are the problems? And then from there, the board generally, and the other thing it does is it goes into a library that is accessed by the public. And it really ensures the transparency of the information to our community. And that's why I think RFIs are so important, and I really don't encourage email, because our public doesn't have the same access to our email. But then on the second piece, then the board looks at the RFI and decides, yeah, that looks like a pretty big problem. Let's then figure out, whether what the staff wants to do about it. So, we don't sit around and say, how do we solve this? We say, this looks like it's pretty big, kind of like the disproportionate discipline, and we need to get on top of this. So, and some RFIs really are just questions. So a lot of RFIs, they just sit in the library because someone wanted to know something,
So here's how I see the path from RFI to action, because I think that's the question on the table, right?
Yep.
And so, depending upon what we learn in the RFI will then depend on what the potential action would be in the spring, right? So I would think that the way this would work is we do the RFI, we give everybody the information, and then agenda setting at a board meeting, say, listen, we've gotten this RFI, this is, based on this information, this is what I'd like for us to talk about in our December prioritization meeting. Right, and then we have this discussion like we had today. So an RFI isn't just we're going to give you information. We're not tackling it. It's let's start with the information. Then once we have that information, how does that direct the direction of the board for staff in regards to action? And then I think that we continue to use just the agenda setting process, and then this process to direct. This is how this is going to work or move forward. Does that feel right? I mean, that's kind of.
Yes, it does feel right. I guess I was just asking and I don't know if this is what Richard asking, but with all the other things we've put now for starting discussion in spring of 2022 with potential longer scale discussion in 22, 23, are these things that we're putting a pin in order to do RFIs still things that we can get into that same set, or are
Yes.
these things that we push further down the road?
No. Yes, I think that, and that what I can do, right, is if we have these RFIs in the queue and then they come up in agenda setting, and then there's, that I'm understanding that I can certainly try to squeeze or limit some of the things we're taking on in the spring to have a little bit more bandwidth to maybe take some of these things on. Or it could be, we meet in December and we say, okay, and we haven't had to do this yet. The board says, Rob, take this off, put this on, right? Which we can do that too. Right, but I do think that the RFI is the right path forward. It asks the right questions to know and understand where we need to go further. But it's not hey, I'm asking you to do an RFI because I don't want to touch it and we're kicking the can. It's the first step in the process to really begin to address the issues and the concerns of the board.
So the December planning conversation is some version of, all right, so we had these items that we identified in August as spring work. We have things that are ongoing. We have RFIs from August. How are those going? Do we want to add? And then presumably in the next bunch of months, other sexy new things might come along that you want to add to the list. And so we always start with this list and whatever new things come along. Sound right?
No, I absolutely think that's right. And I think that, for some of these, the RFI is the right first step. And then,
Right.
and then we can get clear direction as we move forward.
Just being clear, it's not RFI and done, it's RFI
And then
as
the
the
other
first step.
thing, just for staff to know and understand, when we ask RFIs, that also gets staff attention on thinking about this. How can this work as you're thinking about plans? These are things that board is interested in, right? So the RFI helps to also for folks to begin, getting their mind around the things that we need to work in the future. So,
Is there an unwritten protocol for how fast responses need to come to RFIs?
Well, I wrote
Yes.
one 2 years ago and it hasn't been answered.
What's the expectation that we set around RFI response time?
I'm looking at Laura, and Kathy asked that question because we're probably have some stuck in the queue. if I'm gathering that question correctly, we'll go through the RFIs that are in the queue. We'll do everything we can to clear those out. You know, the hope is that within a couple of weeks you get responses
Well-
and answers. So.
I know some take longer than others too, so I totally get that. And some you can't answer because it takes too much time and then it becomes a board policy. So we didn't talk about that, but some RFIs are too burdensome and then they get kicked to the board to say, do we really want staff time to be devoted to answering this? So I get that some of them are not so easy to respond to.
We'll work on clearing the queue in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Even though we didn't change the status on pledge, we're doing that in spring, right? Just making sure.
What was your question? Say that again?
It still says not yet addressed under Pledge of Allegiance, and it's giving me like a
I have a
palpitation.
whole separate list that I'm going to send to Rob, and he's going to update this. I'm
Thank
actually
you,
sending it
Heather.
right this very moment.
I appreciate
Cool.
everybody humoring me.
Right. Excellent. All right, board members, anything else? Rob, anything else?
I just appreciate the time, and this is 2 hours, I think, time well spent. The time we spend around this table thinking through these things allows me to work with our staff and team to make sure we're meeting the expectations of the governance team. I just appreciate the ability for all of us to have open conversations, bring forward ideas, work through those, and I really appreciate your sensitivity to the staff, to the bandwidth of our staff, and I know they appreciate that as well. But and thank you, Heather, for always doing such a wonderful job, you know, keeping us in line and facilitating these conversations.
Just an outrageous bunch with your terrible behavior. It's hard work for me, but I do it because I love you. Thank you for including me. I'm always just touched and inspired by how much you people care and how hard you work. So thanks for giving me a chance to see it from the inside. Tina,
Thank
will this be
you.
our last time together, you and I?
I hope so.
It has been a pleasure working with you, my friend.
It has been a pleasure working with you. Thank you so much for everything.
Do you want to adjourn?
Yes.
Tina, you are
Let's
going to
adjourn.
keep watching every board meeting, everything that's streamed. I just want to apologize. I spoke out of order on the agenda items by bringing up something when we were still asking questions.
Yep.